We are going to get started with our next two panels. There's no break between the two of them because really they are unpacking similar issues but from different vantage points, and they are going to try to define the problem for us. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mara Eliason from National Public Radio, and we're here to continue our exploration of dystopia. I just wanted to thank David for his speech, which was really great, if not inspiring. And I'm happy to be here because I do get to cover these issues in my professional life because I'm able in real time to follow the stress tests that our democratic institutions are undergoing every day. And we are going to dispense with biographies. You can read them in your packet of each of our panelists. I'm going to start by asking each one of them a question. We'll have a lively discussion, and then we'll have time for Q&A. We want to start with Chris Inglis, who has spent 42 years as a computer scientist and a national security professional, focusing on cyber warfare. And what I want to ask him to do is really to define the problem. As we heard David explain, this is not new. It's been going on for a really long time. This might be different in degree, but not in kind. So is this just a problem of new technology?
It's a great question. Thank you, Mara, and thanks for the invitation to be here. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Doesn't have a button.
How's that? How's that? Is that good? Okay, great. I was just saying how grateful I think all of us are to be here in this group. Imagine the things that we could discuss for days' time. It's a pity it's just today. But given the question whether this is really an issue of technology, I think I subscribe to David Ignatius's view, which is that while technology has perhaps accelerated these issues and perhaps might be an enabler, it's less about technology than it is about the things that people do with that technology. If cyberspace or the internet writ large were to be unpacked as a noun, it's really the sum of three things. It's technology, and it's people, and it's procedure or doctrine, the ways in which people essentially make use of that technology. And the weak links in that, typically, from a cyber security professional's perspective, almost always are found in the people and the procedures, less in the technology. There's actually 4 life forces that are coursing through cyberspace, living alongside cyberspace, that in my view are more impactful in terms of what we've been experiencing in this weaponization of information, which I think in the term would say that it's more about the content than it is about the form. The first of the life forces is there's a new geography. People who make use of the internet or reach out across the internet think less about the physical jurisdiction, less about the boundaries, the physical boundaries, than they do about the opportunity to reach and touch things that are only available in the virtual cyberspace. That has a lot to do with how people then think about their opportunities, how they think about both the positive and the negative aspects of what they might do in cyberspace. 2, there's a new way of thinking about organization. There are netizens as opposed to citizens, people who are perhaps inspired or who inspire across the internet as opposed to by physical proximity, and they therefore think of themselves as organizations of one, as opposed to part of an organization that's defined by some physical approximation to people around them. That can be good. Think of the Arab Spring. That can be bad. Think about a lone wolf terrorist that one day turns on the people that bore and rose him or her. And that's a surprise to everyone around there because you thought that because they were physically proximate to you that they were in fact aligned with you or partial to you. 3, there's still disparity in the world. No great surprise by that. There are haves and have-nots. There are the elites and people who have aspirations, but the reconciliation of that, which typically is done by either collaboration or competition or conflict, is increasingly taking place in and through cyberspace. Why? Because that's where you can achieve great leverage. And then finally, not to leave it off the table, geopolitics continues apace. Nations who have either collaborative or competitive or conflict-based relationships, and those are playing out increasingly in and through cyberspace. Cyberspace is the new medium for the resolution of all of those life forces that have been with us since the dawn of time. But the technology makes it possible, probable, more likely that they'll play out in cyberspace. when it's all said and done, it's not about technology, though that's the visible thing. It's about those life forces, and it's about what people do to create the content, manipulate the content, perhaps hold that content at risk. And ultimately, I think, as David indicated, there's a trust issue more than there's a technology issue at issue here.
Matt Chesson is a diplomat who has now gotten up to speed on artificial intelligence and computational propaganda, and has thought a lot about how the human brain, how all of us humans are particularly susceptible to disinformation. So Matt, why does this matter?
So I think it matters because disinformation directly challenges the Enlightenment. And so this is a big concept, right? So the Enlightenment is all about the search for truth through reason. Our civilization is based on the Enlightenment. The founding fathers were Enlightenment era thinkers. The Constitution is an Enlightenment era document. And what disinformation does is it tries, malicious actors are using disinformation to try and push us into a post-truth world. In a post-truth world, facts don't matter. And facts are really only whatever you can persuade people of. And so in that type of environment, evidence doesn't matter, the rule of law doesn't matter, science doesn't matter, expertise doesn't matter, academics don't matter, because it's all about whatever you can persuade people of. So this is directly contrary to the basic agreement on facts that's necessary for civic discourse and democracy. And so this is a very dangerous concept, and we really should push back whenever we hear this idea that we're in a post-truth world. Facts do matter. There is objective reality, and we need to basically fight back against disinformation for particularly that reason, because this is a challenge to democracy and it's a challenge to our civilization.
Okay, Clint Watts has spent his career tracking bad people on social media, whether they're hacker collectives or cyber criminals or terrorists, nation states, political actors. I should mention, he's written a new book called Messing with the Enemy, which comes out next month. So we're happy to do that. So define the threat. Who is it that we should be worried about?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I'm glad there are cadets here today because I was the threat at one point. I learned about the influence business by making prank calls on the Central Guard room at West Point. And, but it was the backbone of how I started to, don't do that, by the way, you'll get in trouble. But that's the backbone of like how I started to understand it. And to Chris's point, it's the human, behavior behind it. So as we all know, the most powerful force in social media is the group Anonymous, right? The hacker collective. They were a Time magazine cover like 5 years ago. And what happened to them? They're not around anymore, right? They got penetrated. And why? Because it turns out if you don't know each other, it's pretty hard to trust each other. And it's very easy to penetrate those groups and infiltrate them. And they were sort of the first level of social media influencers. They had the idea now, like if I take your information through hacks, I can kind of put it out on the internet and it will create a behavior change. Terrorists were really the next one, and this is sort of the Cliff Notes tweets of the case studies I do in the book, which is, the internet was Al-Qaeda's savior. That's what we did, and we talked about when I was at West Point about 15 years ago at the Combating Terrorism Center. But their demise was social media. They could not control, and they had the same filtering problems that we're having with fake news, essentially. They could not control the message, and it really unraveled on them in a way that is eerily similar to me to what you might call the Trump train or the resistance on Twitter today. We're seeing the same phenomenons play out. The interesting thing about this is the Russians understood all of this so much better despite really having a closed information environment. And they were the third, generation really of social media influencers because they knew that the only thing worse than no information is too much information. They know to just bombard you to where you can't make sense of it. And I think it was maybe DFR Lab or somebody or Elliot Higgins' group last week showed that there was up to 28 different versions of the story of who poisoned the agent in the UK that are already out on the internet. And so what the Russians really understood was how to use hacking to power influence the way Anonymous sort of kind of understood, but to do full spectrum, multi-platform, to synchronize all of it and to pick objectives. And so I'm sure you've all heard me beat the Russia horse, but I am not worried about the Russians really in the future. You've already seen a glimpse of it with Cambridge Analytica, and really the showdown that will come this week in terms of actors is what I call trolling as a service. If I were really a crude business person in the social media space, I would just offer all of what you see in social media influence as a service for anyone to acquire. And the people that want it the most are those with money, and those with an ideology, and those with time, and those with technology. And guess who those people are? Political candidates. They have more resources, they have more desire, they have more need to influence voters, lobbyists, corporate PR campaigns. And so it'll be fascinating to watch as this unfolds with these we had a discussion a little bit yesterday about platforms versus the actors, which is, which way does it go? It will be, Mark Zuckerberg can't talk like I can in here today, but I would go in there and say, thank you all for having me here today and for contributing so much money to run your political campaigns on my platform that we've been able to institute controls to make sure that you're not manipulating it in devious ways.
Now that, I would like to cover that story.
So I bring that to everyone's attention because we like to point at the Russians overseas, or we like to point to terrorists, but we don't like to admit that our number one enemy is us and our friends on social media. In information warfare, fear not David or Goliath, but Judas. It will be someone in your own circle that wittingly or unwittingly coughs up your information and sacrifices it. When we are tracking bad people online, the Russian, operators are very good at keeping their security at bay, but their friends and family and colleagues and people they discuss with, or maybe when they go to Montenegro and they drink too much, always post something on Instagram, and that's where it starts. And so it's same with any of these groups. This is what we see with Cambridge Analytica, any of these groups that are out there. So I think the biggest enemy is us. We go to social media to find happiness. We go to look and aggregate our preferences, and we've not answered the question of ourselves, which is why are we so miserable after all of this experience, the psychology of it, the interest and the trust. We don't trust the platform. And so I think really I'm fascinated. I showed Deborah Amos last night. The very first time I showed the Russian trolling operation on a slide was at a government briefing in, I think it was June 2014. And everybody was like, that's interesting, tell me about ISIS. I couldn't get anyone to pay attention to it. It's great to see everybody here today. But ultimately, we need to come to terms with our social media companies are our greatest asset in many ways in this country. And so we don't need to destroy them to protect ourselves. We need to figure out how to work with them in terms of government and society and recognize there will always be bad people trying to manipulate us.
So one of the things that we have become very aware of is what the problem is, and the fact that the Russians, or whoever these actors were pretty much pushing on an open door, that we were so hyperpolarized, so divided already, that there was a fertile field for all these bad actors to plow. So if that's the problem, what is the best way that we can address this? I mean, we've sanctioned some oligarchs, we haven't sanctioned the alt-right. And does it matter if the same message is coming from a Russian troll and from a hypothetical American political leader who are saying the exact same thing? The election is rigged, or you shouldn't have any trust in the news media.
So my own sense is what we'll discover through the day, it's going to be a belts and suspenders and a zipper approach. We're going to have to do many things. They'll have to be mutually reinforcing. To David's point, at the end of his talk, he talked about the need for greater attribution, greater provenance, so that those reasonable people, you get my definition of what I think a reasonable person is if you agree with me. So that those reasonable people can know something about the sourcing, and so that they can make a fair-minded decision about the information presented to them. But I worry that while I subscribe to Matt's view, which is that the search for truth is the foundation of Western society, we suffer some cognitive dissonance in that regard. And that's the theory, but we're ultimately more comfortable being affirmed in our bias, especially when we're in a room that's full of noise and chaos. When we kind of enter into cyberspace and we're presented with so many options, it's hard to try to figure out how to read through all of that and to come to some thoughtful choice about what's true, what's not. Sometimes it's easier just to retreat back to your corner and pull in with you those things that affirm and make your biases perhaps all the more reassuring. And we therefore have to make sure that we're not simply trying to achieve provenance or attribution, that we're not simply knocking down what we would describe as the bad ideas, but we're creating positive ideas, transcendent ideas that are affirming because they're actually forward leaning. They're affirming not because they push you back, but because they pull you forward. Remember John F. Kennedy stepping to the mic in 1961 and telling against all scientific advice we should go to the moon and return. He essentially changed what people thought was possible and appropriate. There's too little of that going on today. There's too much of recrimination, acrimony. So I think a very strong component of this is to figure out what we do moving forward as opposed to what we do defending ourselves standing still.
Matt, if humans like affirmation, not information, or certainly not information that challenges their preconceived ideas, what do you do about that?
So I think there's a couple things. First, I'd like to say that I think we shouldn't do. One of them is a lot of the knee-jerk responses are to try and say that we should all have verified identities online. I think some of our adversaries would love this. Russia and China especially would love it if everybody had to have some sort of verified identity online. The other thing we shouldn't do is undermine the First Amendment. So censorship is not the solution to this either. The First Amendment and our commitment to free expression are really the things that make us powerful. And so we need to make sure that people don't utilize the disinformation challenge as a pretext for actually engaging in censorship. As far as sort of big picture solutions, I mean, I think there's a lot of little pieces of this, but the way I like to think about it is our collective intelligence system is broken. So the collective intelligence system, as I would define it, is our system for determining truth from fiction. So back in the 20th century, we had a couple of national news channels. We had prominent national newspapers, a very rich local media ecosystem, the government, academia, the church, and we trusted these institutions to tell us and help us determine what's true and what's false. Those institutions have been undermined. We don't trust them. There's much more of a diversity among a lot of those different entities. And so into that gap, malicious actors have used technology to build these malicious collective intelligence systems that basically try and hook people with emotionally pleasing disinformation. They get them into this information ecosystem where people are looking around and saying, well, all these people who look like me on Twitter are saying this, and I'm going to all of these different websites and they're all saying this. It must be true, and the mainstream media is just lying to me. And so I think that's one of the big sort of conceptual challenges is we need to build new institutions of democracy that basically rebuild our collective intelligence system. So what is this? A lot of these ideas have been mentioned before, more information about our information, bot detection tools, reputation scores, maybe artificial intelligence agents that help us determine the sources of information. There's lots of nodes in this particular solution to the problem. I don't think it's going to be any one particular solution.
There's going to be whole panels about solutions later, and I want to talk a little bit more about the threat, and in particular, the next iteration of the threat. I mean, we saw what happened in 2016. What are you guys looking forward to or worried about for 2018? Are we going to see something new and different? Are we going to see a bunch of deep fakes? What's the next iteration of this problem on the American political scene?
I think it's self-preference and opting out. I mean, there's a couple ways for social media platforms I think it could go. One, the loss of trust on social media platforms will affect most those who are better educated and use more filtered or edited news sources. So they will pull back from it. Part of the reason you'll hear people call New York Times or CNN or whatever fake news is because they don't watch that anyways. I mean, if you look at the stories that were circulated in different political communities, part of the reason you had these outlets that could trend very quickly with fake news stories is because nobody ever heard them. Because the filter isn't an institution or a newspaper, it's your friends. Your friends are your filter. That's how you're getting your information. And so I would not be surprised in the next 8 years if you don't see a major political candidate in the United States advocate for the breakup of the United States that actually gets traction. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. They won't win, maybe, but the idea will be there. I would not be surprised by this at all. I would tell you that there's right now between 3 and 5 countries in the or nations in the United States that are really divided up more based on their information than it is based on their actual, allegiance. And you can see about how they channel that. I am from Missouri. It's interesting. I was considered a pro-drone war hawk that could not go into the Obama administration. Now I'm a shill for Hillary Clinton that cannot be trusted. But that's in the social media environment. People that know me in real life know that I'm part of the deep state, or maybe I just work for the government. So these labels, though, are by different nations, that are putting them on different characters as they play out. I would tell you that there is more in common between a portion of the United States in terms of the alt-right movement online that has more allegiance with people in Germany, France, Canada, and the UK. I would also tell you there's parts of Europe that are more aligned with more sophisticated parts of Canada, cosmopolitan areas, and same for, if you look west, you could say the same for Pacific United States connections to Asia. And if you really want to understand how the world unfolds, you start with language. And I'll give you an example. If you wanted to track Jabhat al-Nusra and the Islamic State on social media and understand who was gaining power, you had to look at which one was duplicating their content into more languages quickly. Battalions formed based on whether, on the ground, whether they could communicate with each other. They formed online whether they could share propaganda with each other. So French, foreign fighters oftentimes ended up with, guess who? Moroccans and Algerians. Why? Well, they sometimes would talk and communicate the same language. The same thing with these social media nations in our own country. And it goes to dialect, it goes to common phrases. Hashtags tell you a lot. Our country is defined more by Trump train, MAGA, and resistance than it is by Democrat or Republican right now. That's why the political parties are struggling so bad. And so I think the way to think about this election, the different directions it can go, is how or who tries to harness those different nations in the virtual space to have them play out in the actual space.
I told you this was further explorations of dystopia. So I need to understand that. These social media nations, this is kind of what David was talking about, but extreme unbundling. I mean, just give me a couple examples. You've got, what, California and New York are one social media nation, and the South, like what?
I can give you one. Macron. The leaks for Macron. Does anyone know where they popped up on Twitter? It was a Canadian journalist who's now a White House correspondent for Rebel Media. You had a Canadian who's in the United States with a social media outlet that tipped the world to the hacked emails of a presidential candidate in France. That is a nation. I mean, they are working in concert together. They share the same values, they share the same symbology, they share the same words. I could map them out if you wanted to. I don't know who would do anything with it. That's the problem with the institution, misalignment with these populations, is that you can watch that sort of play out. And the same thing is happening for in the Russian example, and we saw this going into the election. I didn't believe it until Jade Helm 2015. And you'll see people say this a lot of times. Those are stupid ads. No one believes them. I didn't believe them either until I saw the amplification of the Jade Helm 15 conspiracy and people physically showing up to protest. And we had that sort of pickup all the way through for a year.
Just explain what Jade Helm is for people
Jade
who don't
Helm
know.
was a military exercise the U.S. military was doing in the southwestern United States. And so online, as part of a conspiracy, it was President Obama's plan to declare martial law and to take everyone's weapons. Now, it was a huge joke. Actually, Jon Stewart did the best coverage of it because it was so funny. But it actually led the governor of Texas to put monitors on the U.S. military to make sure that the takeover of Texas did not occur. I mean, that's a behavior change. That's what influence is all about. So we discount it, and it is small. But the goal in influence is, in cyber attacks, it was, I'm going to hack into another country and turn off your power grid. Now the goal is, I'm going to recruit somebody unwittingly in social media to go turn their own power grid off and not know that I wanted them to do that. That's the goal of influence. And it's not a surprise when you're looking at this Cambridge Analytica stuff. They were testing hashtags. They were testing themes. They didn't even know who the candidate was. They were already building the nation. So it's fascinating.
So Matt and Chris, where do you see the threat going next in the near term?
So I think I'd largely agree with Clint in the view, I would characterize it this way: we should worry less about the match and more about the powder keg, right? So what we have are conditions within the United States in particular where there is perhaps the reality bordering on, perception bordering on reality, that there is inequity in terms of access to wealth and treasure, that there is an inequity in terms of the ideological goals of the various political parties, so on and so forth. There isn't the sense of common cause between Texas, California, the Northeast that there once was, and that is a fact that might then be taken advantage of by an external party. We can perhaps not prevent someone from pitching a match into that. Might come inside, might come outside. If the powder keg exists, it will one day explode, and therefore we need to address the foundational conditions. We need to figure out how do we create a greater sense of opportunity bordering on a reality of opportunity. How do we address the fact that capitalism leaves broad swaths of the kind of the financial and economic portions of the United States behind? How do we bring them along without essentially doing a handout system? How do we create political rhetoric that once again identifies common cause and essentially reintroduces the conflict of ideas as one of our best ideas as opposed to a way to do mortal combat? If you don't address those things, it doesn't need to be the Russians or the Chinese or some person in Des Moines, Iowa. The conflict will ultimately rise up because you'll just have these naturally incendiary conditions.
So, Matt, if human beings are wired to like the most extreme information, and our whole social media business model is wired to amplify that, where does this go next?
Well, so I think that's an interesting question, and it's important just to understand a little bit maybe about the technology. I may be previewing the next session a little. But we're starting to see artificial intelligence tools that are radically going to enhance the capabilities of computational propaganda. So for folks who don't know that term, that's basically the use of information and communication technologies to manipulate people. Computational propaganda typically uses a combination of social media, big data, and autonomous agents. Usually right now those are bots. And the bots are either pushing out content, they're propaganda bots that are just trying to spread a message far and wide. You've got follower bots that are trying to like people and content. They're trying to manipulate and game the algorithms that actually show us content online. And then you have these roadblock bots, which are trying to suppress speech, and that's usually through things like hashtag spamming or just intimidating people en masse. And so those are out there now, and they're very effective because of a lot of the new understandings from cognitive psychology about how people can be manipulated and influenced. However, there's a number of emerging artificial intelligence technologies that are going to enhance these capabilities. And just to preface this, there's nothing necessarily wrong with the technologies here, and so we shouldn't focus on the technology as a problem. These technologies can be used for marketing, they can be used for entertainment, but in the hands of malicious actors, they can be used for ill. And so what are these technologies? You've got AI chatbots that are increasingly able to have very human-like conversations online. AIs can now dynamically generate content. They write screenplays, they write music, they've written books. They're increasingly going to be producing news articles and memes. You've got affective computing, where AIs are very good at determining human emotional states from text or audio or video, and also accurately conveying emotions through text, audio, or video. You've got psychometric profiling tools, which are used. So Facebook's advertising system is based on psychometric profiling. And with just small amounts of data, you can determine someone's sexual orientation, their skin color, their political preferences, their personality. And then this can be used to both precision target advertising, but also disinformation. And then I think David mentioned these audio and video manipulation tools, where you basically are moving to this era of pliable reality, where we're not necessarily going to know whether anything we see or hear is actually accurate or correct. And so you've put all these together, and you could see a future where perhaps we might see millions or billions of these propaganda bots that can converse like human beings, dynamically generate content, create cultural artifacts. They're going to be roaming around the social web and trying to influence people. What's sort of a really interesting feature of that environment is that those machines might not be able to tell the humans on social media from the other machines. And so the machines are going to talk to machines, and they're going to be arguing with each other, sharing memes, sharing content. And so we have to consider that our social spaces online may be overrun with this wave of machine-driven communication and speech. And so that'll be really interesting from a cultural standpoint, that we're going to have these other intelligences creating these cultural artifacts But it's also going to be very interesting for where do people go? Where do people go to have those types of conversations? There's a thing called dark social media, which are the closed-off, non-public parts of social media that are getting more and more popular. And so it may be that at this wave of machine-driven communication or the disinformation challenges actually drive more and more people to these sort of gated communities online. And then that poses a lot of challenges because they're closed off. No one knows what's happening in them unless you're actually in them.
Clinton, do you want to?
We used to have secret societies, in person a lot, which were gated communities. And so I know I'm part of the problem with this, which is we've been on this trajectory of the doomsday of social media. And so we can all just quit using it. And I only put this in as a variable because I think this is really where we're at over the last few weeks, which is this fear, holy cow, what's happening to me online isn't really what I'm choosing, to happen. Things are being done to me online. And so that's bad. That's bad for our country. I mean, the powerhouses of our industry in the last 2 decades have all been around cyberspace, really, when you look at it. And so we don't want to lose that, but I think the ultimate trick is how do you restore people's value in physical, real relationships more than virtual relationships. And that we're all, except for a few students here, I was looking around, this is a very old crowd. Not to slight you, but on average, this is much older than the young people that are out there that, by the way, are not on these common platforms. I think young people we can learn from. Some of the studies that are coming out, I'll give you an example about Snapchat, about why young people don't use Facebook, their parents do. That, I think, is very instructive of young people have actually figured it out because there's 3 things, experience. We've all got about equal experience, whether it's our kids or us, on mobile devices and social media apps. But for observations, kids are on it all the time. And so they're learning quicker. It's, their hurdles are less. And so I think there's a lot we can learn actually from younger people as older people. We were talking at a panel yesterday about literacy for social media users. And we're always like, oh, we got to get it in schools and kids have got to know. No, we need to get it in old folks' homes and they need to know because they are the ones that struggle with this the most. The Russians, we saw on several occasions, deliberately recruited people at 50 or older because they were voters. They were passionate. They were ones that were newer to social media and didn't know how to filter it or how to understand what's going on. And so it's just interesting how we think about these solutions going forward is, can we regain our physical relationships? And based on the activism we've seen in the last couple of years, maybe that's the case. So
I want to ask one more question, then we're going to open it up to Q&A from the audience. So short of solving the problems of globalization, the things that Chris talked about, short of making sure we have broadly shared prosperity so we don't have all these divisions and resentment at elites, is there any country in the world that you guys see as a model for dealing with this? I mean, Finland, France, is there anybody who's ahead of us in terms of getting this, whether it's putting forth a more unifying narrative about democracy or solving these particular problems? Is there a model out there?
Actually, there's a great article about a year ago by Reed Standish, I think it was in Politico.com, about the Finns. And he asked the question, he says, why are the Finns not worried about the Russians careening into their election? The short answer to the question is not because they're not trying. Turns out that he kind of described 3 things that the Finns have going for them. It's a relatively small, compact, homogeneous population, 5.6 million people. You probably get them on the Princeton campus and speak to all of them from the kind of the bell in the chapel. So that's not that hard. But the 3 things they had going for them: 1, they had a government that was very proactive, very unified, joined up, kind of participated in a conflict of ideas, but when they decided they were going to do something, took great pains to communicate that broadly across the government to the people that they would serve, so that they achieved forward momentum. 2, they place a premium when they train their kids to focus on critical thinking. You're not allowed to parrot back or to simply memorize some slice of ideology or some kind of previously determined to be smart phrase. You have to actually come up with something based upon an examination of the facts, all of them, the convenient ones, the inconvenient ones. And 3, they have material experience with the Russians. So if you're going to try to beat them from the Russian perspective, you got to do 3 things. You got to catch up to them. They're not standing still. 2, you got to get past the critical thinkers, and 3, you got to look like something other than a Russian. That actually is a recipe for some degree of success. It's harder to do that in a society that is as chaotic and diverse and wonderful as the United States. Those are all features for us, but they offer to those that would exacerbate those seams and fissures a place to stand in and perhaps take advantage of that. What we might do is to take those three things, figure out to what degree we can do those, but then add kind of something that perhaps slows down the economics of the adversary, change the economics of what they can do to us, make it such that we increase provenance, we increase attribution, we reduce the possibility of disinhibition. People act differently when they know they're not going to be accountable in that space. So if you combine all of those with perhaps a reduction in the kind of globalization of the technology arrayed against us, we might just make some forward progress.
So I think there's a lot of knowledge out there that the United States can utilize. We're relatively new to this game, and we go engage with our European counterparts, and we say, you know, Russia's attacked us with information. Their response is, welcome to the party. They've been dealing with this stuff for years. I think part of the challenge, and one that the academic community can possibly address, is a lot of the knowledge about how to combat disinformation effectively that's been gained through hard work over the years in Europe isn't in English, and so it's not accessible to a lot of folks here. So that's one thing we'd like to see, is just more of that knowledge being translated into other languages and shared. As far as particular countries, so Sweden, I wouldn't say that everything that they do is fantastic, but I think they do have a very interesting whole of government and really whole of society approach to countering disinformation that looks at everything from civic education, from K through 12, to public service announcements for the population, to actually going to civil servants across the government and training them in how to respond to disinformation. So their version of DHS is very active in this. We've been talking to them, and I think there's some very interesting lessons there. I think there's also maybe some things that wouldn't work so well here and would violate the First Amendment, but there are a lot of good lessons from the folks who've actually been in this conflict for a lot longer than we have.
Okay. We're going to take some questions. I think you're supposed to walk to the mic, maybe? Where's Elizabeth? Is that what you want people to do?
If you can hear them, they don't.
Okay, all right. Just shout. Sir.
You talked about social media nations and the development of tribes or groups, affinity groups that aren't rooted geographically or in jurisdictions. And I'm curious, just what do you think is relevant, or what can we learn from the first wave of the annihilation of space, the telegram of railroads, of the development of global ideologies in the late 19th and early 20th centuries?
Yeah, so the answer is simple, the execution is impossible. What do we believe in as a country? I mean, it was look at those that have done well. The Islamic State. Hey, everyone show up here. We're going to build an Islamic State. It's in our name. It's very easy to communicate. The Russians know very much what they want in the information space. It is overt and clear from their state propaganda. Dissolution of NATO, get rid of the EU. Let's make Russia great again by having America withdraw from the world stage. It's very clear. The U.S. has no message right now. Our campaigns have messages. It's very clear. The Trump campaign should be commended for how they catalyzed everybody around a very defined message. There is no doubt about what they believe in. The problem is that is not a shared American message, and therefore you can't fight back if your feet are not on the ground in the information space. And so as a country, there's really no way for us to push back, whether it's terrorists or the Russians, or even in terms of how we stand right now, because our message, if you listen to the president, and I brought this up for countering Russian propaganda, this was asked to me on the Senate floor, well, what should we do? And I said, if our administration is anti-NATO, anti-EU, anti-immigration, America first, we are saying what the Russians are saying. There is no counter. So the idea around America solidifying itself is to, and Richard Haas, the great Richard Haas, always says that your foreign policy is all about your internal domestic politics ultimately. And whether it's in social media or analog media, you have to know what you believe in. And so I felt like during the Cold War, the US very much knew. I mean, that's why you can't have people show up at Charlottesville and say the Soviet Union is our friend, like they did last spring. They showed up and said Russia is our friend. I mean, we beat them in hockey. That was not happening when I was a kid, So that sort of, what does it mean to be an American? The president is right when he talks about this, and that we don't have that. And if you don't have that foundation, there is nothing you can do in the information space to project without looking like a fraud. This is what WikiLeaks points out every single day. That's why they can punch at us. Yeah.
Ma'am.
I wrote my question down. I basically want to know, where do you think, if you were to pick one thing where it went off the rails, what would you pick? Considering that disinformation is nothing new. If you were to go back in time to one point, change one thing over the course of events, where would you go and what would you change? And could it be the point at which we started ingesting news that was self-affirming? Is that the point where the divide happened?
Probably a seminal moment somewhere in 2015, 2016, long insidious onset. So kind of the tendrils of this, I think to David's point, go back well before that. But when we became aware that somebody was attacking servers, stealing emails, perhaps doing the trolling, we thought of that as a set of tactics, and that we might just defeat the tactics. Too late, we realized that that really wasn't about the emails or the social media. It was really about going after the critical infrastructure we know as the election system, and so we centered on that for a bit. That really wasn't the game. The game was an attack on the confidence of this society, and it wasn't an attempt by one society to defeat another. They don't want to defeat us. They simply want to distract us so that they then have a freer hand in their own area, or perhaps as a punitive measure for what we did or didn't do at the fall of the Berlin Wall. So too late in the game, we realized what the nature of this was. It's really a contest of big ideas. It's really a contest of confidence. And if we're not actually playing at that third level, we will lose, right? We will lose the game.
So I would actually point out an example that goes back a little further, and I'm going to illustrate this. It's just a show of hands. Who actually pays for news? Who subscribes to a news site? Okay, this is a lot more people subscribing to news than in most audiences, and that's probably because we're at Princeton. But usually it's about half the audience or less. And I would say that that is actually one of the biggest problems, is many of us have gotten addicted to free news. And this has completely disrupted the business model in the media industry. It's destroyed local news, and it has incentivized basically yellow journalism, right? And because it's all about trying to have the most inflammatory article or the most inflammatory headline, because that's how you get clicks and that's how you get ad revenue. And so their truth is not incentivized properly online. And this goes, has a lot of relation to social media business models, which are all based around the virality of information. And so it makes disinformation very easy to disseminate. It makes it spread very quickly. Social media companies don't necessarily have a disincentive to crack down on things like bots, because bots spread content and build up a lot more engagement. You get things like the Macedonian teenagers who are pushing out disinformation just to get the advertising revenue. There's also a malicious ad ecosystem online, where you have these malicious ad companies that are putting out inflammatory articles, very often disinformation, not because they actually care about what's in the content. They don't care if you actually believe it. They just want to get you to click on the article to leave Facebook or Twitter or whatever platform you're on, go to their website, and then they can basically install this very intrusive adware/spyware on your computer to track you throughout the web and then more effectively market products to you. So we've got a whole ecosystem that is very highly incentivized towards disinformation, and we need to think about how we re-incentivize that to incentivize truth.
Sir.
Thank you. I think it was in early 2017, Russia announced the creation of their information warfare force. In that first announcement, one thing that really struck me was how they spoke about the dissemination of propaganda. When U.S. developed U.S. Cyber Command, and before that, some of the subordinate task forces under STRATCOM, we focused on technical capabilities, primarily publicly first defensive capabilities. Now, more recently, we've addressed the fact that we have offensive capabilities. Unlike the Russians, who immediately recognize and have always used the military, been very aware of the utility of propaganda. What role could the U.S. Department of Defense have for strategic psychological operations? I mean, right now the Army is the executive agent. I believe the most, at least in 2010, the most senior PSYOP officer in the Army was a colonel. They didn't have any general officers. So I think that's kind of indicative of where we place the importance of creating cognitive effects in the information environment as opposed to technical effects. Where does the panel see the utility of DoD capabilities for the creation and dissemination of propaganda?
So I would take great care at opening that door. While we're actually in a greatly disadvantageous asymmetric fight, the Russians have for a very long time believed that the value of information isn't whether it's true, but whether it's impactful, and therefore propaganda is a feature. In the United States, we've taken great care, at least from a government perspective, to not manipulate the content, either in violation of the freedom of speech, other people's ability to see the unvarnished kind of assertions, not necessarily facts of others, or to perhaps not lie to the American people. Now, there are some notable exceptions. David walked through those, and those should be exceptions as opposed to the rule. So we need to take great care in that regard. The bet that I think is on the table is as to whether our big idea, which is that allowing individuals to pursue their aspirations and allowing that conflict of ideas to flourish and that diversity is a strength, that's the bet against the Russian, perhaps, view, which is that the purpose of the internet is to sustain the state. That's, I think, what we're trying to kind of put on the table. We perhaps have not spoken strongly enough or clearly enough about the merits of our big idea. When we had a U.S. information agency, we had Radio Free Europe. Remember the days when we would broadcast insights about American society, Western society to others and said, look, on the merits of what we do, what we are, how we live, we'd like to make the case that this is the better model. I think that we always took pains to try to give the most positive telling of the story, but I don't think we tried to actually lie in the telling of that story, at least not as the preferred modality. By exception, perhaps we did. And so I take very great care to give an information operations mission to a military command that is supposed to execute the will of the executive branch as opposed to conceive and deploy policy and perhaps shape truth from its own internals.
Yeah, so I've worked on military PSYOPs programs for over a decade, on and off. My PowerPoint briefings litter the C drives of the Pentagon. I've worked on it, I've seen what the Russians have done, and I would tell you to kill it all. I would not even do it. You will get greater effects on the target population by taking all the money that we spend on military PSYOPs and putting it in $1 bills and airdropping it over the population. I am not joking in the slightest, and I'm telling this out of failing. This is me being honest with, I created all sorts of tricked out, like we can do this campaign or whatever. We can't do it. We can't launch it. Our authorities prevent us from doing it. As soon as we step into that information battle space as military, we get entangled with ourselves. There's brilliant people in the ranks. The Global Engagement Center struggles with this now, even from the State Department side about they are mostly trying to create tweets that keep them from getting fired. They're not influencing people. There's so many restrictions. Look at a troll farm. These are journalism students who the next day show up and get told to write stripped out blogs, do 8 of them a day, go, leave, take nothing with you, pass through the door. You up there, make social media accounts. Here are 6 SIM cards today, make social media accounts. I would love it, if we could do that, but it undermines our principles as a democracy ultimately. And it's very hard for the military to do. The military ends up doing it because we turn to the military when we want something done because we can't make other parts of the government do it a lot of times. And that's, how it comes out in the wash. It's not meant that way. Everyone's trying to do the right thing. But I think for America as a whole to do that counter propaganda, we're better to throw a rock concert or, broadcast streaming video in through Netflix, through social media, or invest in alternative ways that promote us as a country. And I don't mean that disparaging for military folks in here. I worked with you, and we always failed. We always failed, in the counterterrorism days. I see the Russia problem or state-sponsored disinformation even harder. So that's my take. I'll probably be shot when I walk out the door, but I mean, that's my point.
So I would add on a couple things. I think, first of all, we need to be very careful about how we're using these terms. So propaganda has sort of gotten a bad rap. 100 years ago, propaganda was advertising. And every government engages in propaganda, and some of it is very benign, right? So propaganda is don't use your cell phone while you're driving. There's propaganda out there about anti-smoking ads. And so we need to be very careful when we use propaganda, because a lot of what we're really concerned about is disinformation, right? And I don't like the term fake news. A lot of people that work in this field don't like fake news. So everybody should try and use disinformation, because fake news is now politically loaded. It's very non-specific. But when you're talking about the US government and what we're doing, there is a uniformity of opinion that we should not engage and will not engage in disinformation or unattributed communications. And so I'm very pleased that when I go to these psychological operator conferences, people don't want to be engaging in using the tools of malicious actors and tools of our adversaries. And that's very reassuring. And I don't think we should be doing that, because then you're creating this post-truth environment. You're contributing to the problem. So I think if we're going to use those capabilities, they need to be very constrained. You have to use them very carefully, as Chris said. And definitely should not be used against the US population. But we need to make sure that we preserve the values and live by the values that we preach.
We've run out of time. We've gone over. I want to thank you very much, and I really wanted to make sure that we ended on a positive, inspiring moment, just to counter the dystopian theme of today, which I do think the biggest takeaway is America needs a big idea to counter this, and maybe it's just as simple as remembering that America is supposed to be a big idea. America is an idea. And so, off to the next.